is it. Gonna see the big film of the year. And no, it's not that one. Something much more profound than that. Anyway, there you go. But just keep in mind, just because something has a good message, we still got to keep the film accountable and its good quality. There's only one way to find out. Yo, Kenneth, my man, did you put on some filter or something? You're looking fairly young there. Nice mustache. Yeah, it is a real miracle. This is usually a small screen. We're doing a big screen. Also, oh, I guess Michael Caine's not out of action yet. Maybe that's his last film or something. Anyway. Sweet. You know, coming out of Sound of Freedom, I said to the staff involved, or more precisely, just staff members, I don't think they were selling tickets or anything, or anything like that. They looked more like cleaners and, oh, see something for Saw X. I didn't saw that yet. But anyway, I said to the staff members, thank you so much for showing Sound of Freedom. And they smiled and said, oh, you're welcome. Maybe they didn't quite catch on what I said, but I think they're smart enough to catch on to what film I just saw. Yeah, that was a tough one to go through. That film's gonna make you go through a whole wide range of emotional spectrum, which can't be said for a lot of modern Hollywood productions these days, which are so fixated on formulas and fixated on terribly written characters that people just yearn for something that they can relate to. Now, of course, the film I just saw was based on a true story, so I mean, what I've just said presupposes that people could be like writing fiction and stuff like that. But anyway, Sound of Freedom. The film by Angel Studios. The film that was getting word of mouth spread by Mel Gibson. It stars Jim Caviezel, the man who portrayed Jesus Christ in Passion of the Christ. Has not been in any other major films ever since, apart from the one I just saw, and produced by Angel Studios, the same studio responsible for distributing the Chosen series, which I've been reviewing on this channel for some time now. You know, Angel Studios has got an interesting bunch of content. Maybe I should do more of them. Wingfeather Saga's got my interest, but anyway. What did I think of Sound of Freedom? Well, firstly, what is Sound of Freedom all about? Sound of Freedom is a film based on a true story, and it's a story about Tim Ballard. Well, from what I've seen in the film, it's one of many stories in his very heroic career. But this particular story focuses on this apparent incident where this Spanish family got separated, and in Jim Caviezel's career of fighting against child sex trafficking, this story focuses on Jim's attempt to rescue the brother and sister of this particular family. Significantly with the sister when she's long missing, and Jim has to not only go through the police work, as well as go through some traumatizing evidence, he also has to work undercover for a while and act as if he was part of the very monsters he's hunting down.
The story centres around Tim Ballard, a Homeland Security agent tasked with monitoring and arresting child traffickers across the US. Needless to say, it's a tough job that takes its toll on the man's emotions, but the bigger problem is that for all the criminals they've put in prison, they've failed to recover any of their actual victims. Most of the time it's because they're outside Ballard's jurisdiction, hidden away in places like Mexico and Central America. But when Ballard finally manages to recover a young trafficking victim named Miguel, who begs him to rescue his sister, he hatches a plan to mount a massive sting operation that will take down the entire network and save dozens, possibly even hundreds of innocent children. The plan eventually sees him travelling to Colombia and partnering up with a former cartel boss who's turned his life around, as the men work to set up a false front and gain the trust of the child traffickers. But with his superiors threatening to pull the plug and his partners growing suspicious of his intentions, can Ballard really hope to pull off the seemingly impossible? How much will he be willing to risk to complete his mission, and can he really hope to reunite Miguel with his lost sister? One of the things that really impressed me about Sound of Freedom was how restrained and grounded it all is. It's been classified as an action movie for some reason, but if you're expecting to see gunfights, explosions, and big blowout set pieces, you're definitely going to be disappointed, because that's absolutely not what this film is. It's more of a tense character-driven drama, very much grounded in reality, where there's no big dramatic resolutions to the major plot points, no climactic battle that sees our hero fighting his way out of an impossible situation. What we get instead is the grinding reality of work like this, the negotiations and information gathering that goes on behind the scenes, the tough decisions and compromises that have to be made for the greater good, the personal risks and sacrifices that the job demands. You can see the toll it's taken on Ballard, the things he's forced to see that will probably haunt him for the rest of his life, the people he's forced to play nice with, when you can tell he'd much rather be pounding their faces into mush. And it's all hammered home by some pretty harrowing scenes of the trafficking victims themselves and what they're subjected to. I mean, let's face it, seeing young kids being subjected to stuff like this is always going to be a tough watch, but to the film's credit, it never gets gratuitous or exploitative for pure shock value.
It's not a very comfortable film to watch through, but you know, as a filmmaker, there's something I really appreciate about the way it portrayed the subject matter that it did, in a way that was quite sensitive, but still showed you just enough to make you get the idea, to make you cringe, to make you feel uncomfortable. Like, that's impressive. That is a really impressive skill as a filmmaker. It's that ability to not only show, but also be very deliberate in what you don't show. That can lead to some powerful stuff, because the audience is smart enough to pick up on the implications. You don't need to have everything explicitly thrown at you in your face. Again, this is something that a lot of modern Hollywood movies need to take a cue from. But, yeah, the subject matter of this film is revolting. It's disgusting, and like right from the get-go, there's some very specific filming techniques that they use to make you feel outside your comfort zone. But these kind of scenes make those scenes of levity all the more relieving. I can sense that this is a story where every scene was deliberate, it was meaningful. The way certain shots were made, like I like how the film begins and ends with the little girl playing percussion. It's a sound of freedom. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I like how when the children are put into the entertainment photography, big red flag, there's this shot, there's this really striking shot, and there doesn't seem to be much happening in the shot. Basically, it's a shot of a door closing, but what's particularly striking is the use of sound and the way that it lingers on the door. Like, it lingers there, like the door is hiding something revolting. And there's several others, I think there's a few other shots like this, but I think that one sticks out. Just the way the door's closed, like boom. It's like some predator has like caught a prey or something. It's deeply disturbing stuff. And as the film goes on, you can see the red flags, the way they're trying to get the children to pose, and I must say, the acting on all the actors' parts, I mean, this must have been scary stuff for the children. Gosh, how did they film this with the children? Oh my days. Yeah, the children, the actors, they're really giving it their all. Yeah, especially the people playing the monsters that they're trying to catch. Yeah, it's impressive how an independently made film has really great cinematography. There's I mean, maybe there was one scene where some guy was trying to hold on to his hat with a helicopter, but the hat didn't quite fly off. Either the wind wasn't as strong, or maybe they were in some kind of green screen set, but that's just my speculation. But no, it's impressive how this independently made film has that kind of look and this kind of AAA feel to it. It's very impressive when it's done like that. Honestly, it makes a lot of modern Hollywood like look kind of pathetic in comparison to like modern Hollywood we get these days. The film's not entirely all doom and gloom. There's some comedy, but thankfully it's enough comic relief to provide some necessary levity. Not enough to make it a big distraction. It's enough to make certain characters likable. And yeah, the whole thing is dealt with quite sensitively, and what else is there to say about it? Let's go through the film. I guess it was quite an emotional experience. I even got a little bit teary-eyed at the end there. Just a little squirt coming out there. Because one of the happiest things you're going to see is seeing families reunite, especially if they've been apart for a long time. It's tough stuff, but I think people need to experience films like this. It makes them aware of certain issues in the world and makes them aware of how they can do their part to stop this sort of thing from happening. I think this is going to be a big wake-up call. And there was even a special message at the end of the film itself. Is this film going to be like released on DVD with the special message? Hold on a minute. Is the DVD release of this film going to have that special message in the end? Because that special message at the end was specifically aimed for people to invite other people to the cinema. It would be kind of awkward to see this film on DVD and say, hey, share this with the cinema. It's in the small screen now. Oh wait, maybe they could change it up. I mean, the Simpsons movie did that when it was on the... Oh wait, actually not quite, because in the Simpsons movie, Professor Frink said movie on the big screen when the film was playing. But then in the DVD, when you're showcasing the main menu, Professor Frink says movie on the small screen. Maybe there'll be differences, I don't know. Anyway, what else is there to say about this film? About the film itself? The cinematography was great. It was really sensitively handled, and it's impressive that a film like this has garnered so much attention and moved so many people worldwide that the indie film beats the indie film, as in the Indiana Jones film. That shouldn't be a sentence I'm saying, because the Indiana Jones franchise is really good. You know, up until Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came along, but then again, that film was still alright. But then Dial of Destiny came along, and that movie was awful. So it's no wonder so many people went to see Sound of Freedom instead of Dial of Destiny. But anyway, we're going off topic. Of course, I might as well address the main talking point in this film, is that I've heard a lot of criticism about the film, but the problem with a lot of the public criticism in the mainstream media is that most of this criticism isn't really oriented towards the film itself. The criticism is more about the reputation that the film itself is building.
Sound of Freedom is really good. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it deserves the hype and praise that it's been getting, managing to tackle some pretty brutal subject matter in a sensitive and restrained way that never feels exploitative, delivering some excellent performances from a talented cast that don't overshadow their roles, and a storyline that feels neatly grounded in the true events that it's been based on. In short, it's exactly what you'd want in a movie like this, keeping you gripped and tense right until the end, and almost never descending into the kind of extravagant Hollywood tropes that often derail true stories like this. What's almost as interesting as the movie itself is the reaction it seems to have provoked from the mainstream media that seem determined to tear it down at any cost. I mean, you'd think a movie that sheds light on the hidden nightmare of child trafficking would be a pretty admirable cause worthy of support, but apparently not for the people who applauded Cuties as a bold piece of artistic expression. Why don't they want this movie to succeed? Why is Hollywood so defensive about it? It almost gets you thinking, doesn't it?
I was mentioning to some folks that I'd seen Sound of Freedom today, and they were quite pleased that I did. And they'd heard that Sound of Freedom hadn't really been getting much mainstream advertisements. There, you might have caught a few glimpses of some trailers here and there, but primarily it's really impressive how, similar to Top Gun Maverick, word about this movie spread largely through word of mouth. And through word of mouth, people were able to dominate the box office, mainly because modern Hollywood was getting so tiresome with the movies that they were portraying. People were desiring something meaningful, something emotional, something gripping, something that could actually take advantage of the beauty of filmmaking, our years worth of fine-tuning magnets and electricity to create film and sound, to create this glorious harmony. And people were just wanting filmmaking done right again. And this film seems to have struck quite the chord with people, because there are people who have actually gone through with this intense abuse that no one in their right mind should ever go through.
But then along comes a little low-budget movie like Sound of Freedom that I can honestly say I knew precisely nothing about until a few days ago, which seems to have ignited some kind of firestorm in the public consciousness and capitalised on the gaping hole left by Dial of Destiny's implosion, resulting in massive overperformance at the box office and a flood of emails practically demanding that I watch it now.
No one deserves to be belittled, to be an object for someone else's selfish pleasure. That's just wrong. I've heard stories that people walked out of the film crying because they felt the pain of what people were going through, and some people had actually been through the kind of pain that the characters in the film had gone through, and thus they bonded closely with their families as a result. And I also heard stories of people becoming far more alert of the children around them. Like Tyrone Magnus made a YouTube video talking about how he was much more cautious about children wandering off on their own. And so that tells you that this film has gotten people thinking in a very positive way. And I'm glad to see that my words are not working for mouth. My fellow Scotsman YouTuber, The Critical Drinker, has recommended the film wholeheartedly. It really is quite the immense experience that I would recommend you see for yourself if you ever get the chance. Now, are there some flaws with this film? I suppose maybe a few flaws, but honestly, these flaws about the film itself are probably minor at best, because the film was marketed as an action film for some reason, which is odd, because it's not a very action oriented film. There's some like snippets of it, if you count like barging a pedophile over or invading an island as action, but it's not much compared to the high stakes drama throughout the film. Other flaws with the film, maybe I think it went on at the right amount of time. I think, can I think of any flaws? No, it was paced well, it was written well, it was acted well, it was filmed well. It was a really well made film. I honestly, at this moment, maybe it's gonna require further marination. Maybe, I suppose I did mention that scene with the guy's hat not quite flying off with the helicopter, especially seeing how it was a straw hat. Yeah, I think it says a lot about the film's quality when I, as a film thinking person, as a aspiring filmmaker, I'm really trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel for any potential criticisms to suggest. Honestly, I think any criticism towards this film as a film is minimal. Honestly, all the negative things you've been hearing about the film, it really is about just the reputation that the film has going for itself. It just seems odd, because you'd think that if Hollywood was this sensitive towards sex trafficking, then why did they make the Taken film series with Liam Neeson? So clearly they're okay with making films about that. But looking at the text messages that at the text message sounds like the film's giving me a phone call. No, there's in these kind of movies, it's a common trope to have this text go at the end of the movie saying this person went on to do this, and this woman went on to do this and that, and became an inspiration for all. They are still doing this to this day, and this, and statistics, and what an inspiration, so on and so forth. Sound of Freedom had that, and I think the message at the end of this film is, if I'm not mistaken, there is a message at the end of the film which makes a big claim, and I think this specific big claim is why Sound of Freedom is getting so much mixed attention in regards to the mainstream media. The Sound of Freedom makes this bold claim that the United States of America has an extremely big contribution to the child sex trafficking industry. So it's no wonder you have all these American journalists trying to attack the film. And I can understand people are trying to critique the film for being far too overt in its themes. But honestly, for Angel Studios, this is pretty toned down and not so overt for a film that has inherent Christian values. I remember I was laughing with one of my folks about it because he kind of made a joke that I was noting how the film does have Christian values, but it's not as overt as, say, and then the person said, The Chosen. So that was funny. Oh no, direct biblical adaptation, too overt! Yeah, I just thought that was funny. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing how sensitive this film is, and the themes, the values that the filmmakers clearly have, they're clearly there as broad as daylight, but it's not too overt. But even then, when their biblical virtues are being used, they pick key moments, such as when it's appropriate to the scene at hand. That's when it really hits home. And I think this less is more approach can really work to storytelling. Like, this is completely irrelevant, but take, for example, how Samurai Jack would handle blood and gore as compared to something like Mortal Kombat, for example. In Mortal Kombat, you have all this blood and gore, but it gets to the point where you're kind of desensitized, you're getting used to it. But in Samurai Jack, any bloody scenes are few and far between, so when blood does get spilled, it's all the more alarming. By that same kind of logic, in a more positive sense, there aren't too many scenes where people overtly proclaim their beliefs, but when they do appear, they appear at key scenes where it makes sense to say them, where characters have the right motivation to say them, and it's all the more powerful because they said them. To my recollection, there is one particular Bible verse that was directly quoted in the first half of the film when Tim Ballard is tricking this pedophile into revealing more information about the sex trafficking trade. When he catches him, he makes this direct quote about not harassing the precious children of God. I can't exactly remember what Bible verse it was at the top of my head, but it was a pretty profound one to showcase the infinite virtue that people will have. And it happens again, and when this one character who's the comic relief confesses why he's helping Tim Ballard, and it's such a haunting idea. I don't even want to say this story out loud because it's such a disgusting story, but it's so truthful and it really hits you right here. It's so haunting. It's the kind of thing where the character confesses to doing something so horrible, it's going to stay with him for the rest of his life. And so, as a result from that pain, he says to Tim Ballard, when God tells you to do something, you do not refuse. So, again, whenever the beliefs are being projected, it's projected in ways that make sense and in ways that actually are presented in an affirmative. I think, let's be honest here, anyone of any particular belief system would want to portray their beliefs in ways that make sense to their narratives, given that they write their stories correctly. What else is there to say about the film?
It shows you just enough to leave you in no doubt about what's going to happen or what just took place, without feeling the need to show the disgusting act itself. It walks a fine line, but it does it with sensitivity and good judgment, thank God. And big props,
Thank God indeed, Drinker,
to the actors for their work on this one. Jim Caviezel's had a bit of a weird career in his time, starring in big movies like The Passion of the Christ and The Count of Monte Cristo, but it's like he was never quite able to parlay those roles into mainstream success. He feels like he's been a star in waiting for like 20 years now, but I've got to say, he gives a knockout performance in Sound of Freedom. Like the rest of the film, he's restrained and subdued as Tim Ballard, but he can say a lot with just the slight change of expression or a haunted look in his eyes. He's a man that's seen things he'll never be able to unsee, and it weighs heavily on his soul. He's neatly balanced out by Bill Camp as a former cartel employee trying to atone for past mistakes. He provides a bit of much needed levity in what's obviously a pretty heavy movie, always chomping on cigars and cracking jokes, but underneath it all there's some pretty dark secrets that only come out near the finale.
Me and Critical Drinker are not the only Scottish people to raise awareness of this film. There's Neil Oliver, a historian who worked on the BBC show History of Scotland, is also raising awareness of Sound of Freedom.
In the United States of America, in the past days and weeks, the biggest selling film, outselling everything else, has been one called The Sound of Freedom, and it's based on a true story. The central character is called Tim Ballard, a real life figure who, for a period of time, was an agent for the US Department of Homeland Security. So a kind of a secret service type person. But he came across, was exposed to, came to understand the scale of child trafficking in the world. And not least the number of children and babies that were arriving at the southern border of the United States of America, coming across that border into the US and then disappearing. So he became aware of that amongst other things, and what he did, Tim Ballard, was abandon his job, his career, his pension, everything, and he has risked and dedicated his life since to saving at least hundreds of children and babies from child trafficking. Okay, and according to the film, and I mean, when I'm talking about child trafficking, we're talking about the buying and selling of babies and children leading to and death, and in what appear to be circumstances of unimaginable horror. That's the topic of that film. And people are going to see it because I think it's like a venting of steam from something that's at boiling point. You know, people have, like me, have been being made aware of this in some form for such a long time that it's finally gone from under the radar and beneath the surface. It's breaking through in ways that have hitherto not occurred. According to The Sound of Freedom, child trafficking is now a bigger trade than illegal arms. Buying and selling arms. It's bigger than the illegal drugs trade, or it's getting there.
All these people, including myself, seem to have a deep problem with the way modern society is going these days. And we get a lot of flack for it, but if you really take time to marinate and to think about the implications of society, it can get kind of scary. Like, here's the thing. Regardless of your thoughts on this film, isn't it rather suspicious that the mainstream media will give appraisal to a film that sexually exploits children, and that film is called Cuties, but then they'll heavily criticize a film that goes against child sex trafficking? That just seems rather backwards and odd. And if you're looking at 2023 as a whole, I was thinking to myself about the films that have succeeded in the box office this year. What does this say about people's response to Hollywood today? Why are so many superhero movies today failing compared to the superhero movies in the past 10 years or so? And why do some franchises not have the same kind of appeal that they have today? It's because modern Hollywood has run most of these franchises to the ground. Like, even recently, we've had Expendables 4, and that film's gotten a lot of slack for just milking a franchise dry, and most of the people involved didn't seem to have a lot of fun making it. So why do it? Hollywood's gotten to the point where they care. I mean, well, Hollywood's agenda has been and always will be about money and about where it will lead. So they keep going with the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise because that's what makes the money, even though that franchise, alongside Star Wars, some modern Disney products these days, and a few other franchises, have been heavily criticized for a variety of reasons, such as this content that they've had, that since they think in their heads that they're too big to fail, that they can get away with low effort stuff. So, and they combine this contentedness with virtue signaling. But the problem is, this virtue signaling completely contradicts like common sense. Like, they give such messages such as like, they take virtues that are good at face value, but then they twist them. They say women are far superior and better. Women are far superior and better than everything compared to men, especially if they're white men. Like, you have messages like that where instead of teaching actual equality, they're actually wanting like revenge, basically. And they combine this with their lust to indulge in their carnal desires. But instead, we should be creating movies that actually inspire people to do better. And if you look at 2023 and 2022's track record of the films that have succeeded in the box office, what does this say about the kind of films that people want? Why has the Super Mario Brothers movie succeeded? Why has Puss in Boots: The Last Wish succeeded? Why has Top Gun: Maverick succeeded? Why has Oppenheimer succeeded? And why has Barbie succeeded? What do all these films have in common? Well, all these films care about convincing looking effects, which is why people have been quite attracted to the Barbie film, which actually used quite a lot of practical effects, but it's still got a lot of slack for preaching the woke nonsense in modern Hollywood these days. People have given some appraisal to the Super Mario Brothers movie and the recent Netflix One Piece show, because those kinds of presentations actually care about their source material, and they give people virtues to look up with in the context of their stories in many ways. And you also have this overwhelming successes of Top Gun Maverick and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and all these kind of films are essentially bringing people back to values that are timeless and are traditional. Like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is waking people up to the realization that their hedonism can't last forever. So they've got to find value in something other than carnal hedonism. Stuff like Top Gun Maverick showcases why traditional healthy masculinity, as well as patriotism towards one's country, can actually be a good thing when done correctly. And in Top Gun Maverick, you actually have men and women being equals, with men and women equally flying the jets and doing all the cool stunts. You see, this is actually equality. You don't have one side bickering and trying to belittle the other. You just have them working together and transcending above their carnal desires to make for a healthier future. And this is exactly what Sound of Freedom stands for. And that's why Sound of Freedom has also succeeded in the box office, because it's teaching the same message. And if you look around you and if you're actually paying attention, you're noticing that a lot of people, not the mainstream media, the people outside the mainstream media, and just the common people like you and me, are looking at modern Hollywood these days. They're looking at the nonsense that modern woke Hollywood is preaching, and with their formulas that are so tired and formulaic, and we're all just sitting there and standing and just going, look, we've had enough. We're not supporting this formulaic trash anymore. We want to support stories that are actually entertaining, not the kind of stories that cram messages down our throats. We want stories that actually make us feel something. We want stories that actually entertain us and teach us stuff that is meaningful. Now, a lot of people can accuse like Sound of Freedom of stuffing a message down its throat, but it's a message that's handled particularly well, even if it's quite overt. There's a difference between handling an overt message fairly well in the context of the film and beating people's heads over with an obvious agenda that, if you're paying attention, actually doesn't do people any favors. Now, you might go onto the webs online and think, whoa, how come Sound of Freedom only has decent to okay ratings on stuff like Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb? Now, IMDb, that can be understandable, but Rotten Tomatoes, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but nobody takes Rotten Tomatoes seriously anymore. Basically, the mainstream audience is basically saying this: why should we trust modern Hollywood, modern woke Hollywood, to pander and virtue signal to us if they are trying their hardest to silence actual virtue, which includes the protection of innocent, abused children? I think that pretty much speaks for itself. I love tea. I like my tea. I like a variety of tea. So as for Sound of Freedom itself, I was considering giving it an 11.9 out of 12, given the fact that there were a few mistakes in regards to the filmmaking, but you know what? Even Citizen Kane had a mistake, and it's considered the the greatest film of all time. Yeah, I might as well give Sound of Freedom a 12 out of 12. Go watch it. Just keep in mind, I was legitimately trying to think of something that the film could be at fault for. I mean, maybe you could call the film out for being a bit too overt in the way it did its messaging, but here's the thing. For the standards of Angel Studios, this is fairly subdued, so which adds further credit to this film's amazing ability to be beautifully sensitive. That's kind of a paradox to say, beautifully sensitive, because this film is it's about such a horrible, horrible industry. But you know what? That makes the family reunions all the better, eh?
Either way, regardless of the media firestorm raging around it, Sound of Freedom is an excellent movie that kept me thoroughly gripped from start to finish. It's a film that reminds us that even though there's a lot of bad people in this world doing the worst things imaginable, there are also still good men fighting to bring them to justice. And maybe that's something we could all do with remembering. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Suppose there is one last thing I'd like to say before I end this recording. This is going to be a little rough, but bear with me. I won't name any names just for protection purposes. In the past, I have known someone who has confessed to me that they have been abused in their upbringing. And it tore them apart on the inside. It took them a long time to heal. It took that person a lot of therapy time. But through sheer grace and the learning of forgiveness, they've eventually recovered. And I guess if any of you have been through a similar experience, honestly, it's not your fault. Life doesn't always give you a lucky hand. It can be awful to have, especially if you have people that are meant to be close to you, to betray you right there, right here. It can feel like the scars could never heal. But honestly, the willpower to recover, the bravery to speak up about the abuse, and the willingness and further bravery to embrace intimacy. Way to go, champ. You're great. You're all wonderful people. You really are. No one should ever have to go through that kind of abuse you went through. Nobody. Let's make a cleaner future together.